Hey, greetings everybody. David Chatham with Angel Oak Creative. This is our latest series of Talking Tough. It's part of our nonprofit tough year. We decided to theme this year nonprofit tough. We're coming out of COVID, just really feeling like nonprofits are exhibiting what it means to be nonprofit tough. We kind of have a saying that when the going gets tough, the tough nonprofits get going, right? So, they lean into these issues. So we've had some great conversations with folks about different characteristics that make up nonprofit tough organizations and communities. Today, we've got just another amazing just contributor to our nonprofit community. Merald Holloway is with Rural Forward in North Carolina 100. I'll let him tell you a little bit about those, but I met Merald a little while back, probably a few months ago, and was just really impressed, Merald, with the work that you all are doing and the commitment you have to strengthening, talking about nonprofit tough, to really strengthen the nonprofits and rural communities that you're serving, and just how important that is. I mean, some of us who are, in the big cities of Raleigh and Charlotte and some of those, we don't always understand some of the challenges that maybe some of the smaller rural communities face, and don't always get to really get exposed to that. So I'm looking forward to some of that today. But tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of how you came into being in the nonprofit community, and just what are Rural Forward in North Carolina 100, and what role do you play there?
Yeah, okay. So I guess I'll take it back a little bit to the beginning. I guess a little bit about my origin. So I am from a rural community. I grew up in Rockingham County. It's in the central, I guess smack dab, kind of in the middle of the state. It is near the Virginia line. Grew up there. Textiles were big, tobacco was big. It was I'm clearly in the Generation X category. So things agriculture and textiles were really big back then, and Rockingham County was a very wealthy county back then, and not so much now. NAFTA happened, and a lot of those plants went away. And back in those days, people basically just had to, be 16 and they would get school and they would go farm, or they would graduate high school and they would go work, get a job at a factory. And the systems that we had in place didn't really have to think of their work or have their resources have much of an equity lens. Circles I was around, folks who I didn't necessarily, obviously there's been poverty all the time, but I didn't see a lot of poverty, and there just wasn't a lot of that. And so but I didn't want to be in that rural area. I knew that because there wasn't a lot of opportunity. I wasn't interested in farming. Our folks didn't have a bunch of land. And I had the wonderful opportunity to be able to travel a little bit. I had family members in different parts of the country, spent a lot of time in New York and stuff. And so I had a wonderful opportunity to kind of get out. And I knew I wanted to kind of see more of the state, more of the country. So left the area and went to school, Carolina. So I'm a big Carolina fan, as you can see back here with this pennant. And did not, David, I did not get into the nonprofit space originally. My dad was, basically came from an era that a lot of, descendants of enslaved people in this country came from. And he did not have the opportunity to go to a 4-year school. So it was very important for me, and I have one sister, for us to be able to go to whatever school we wanted to. So it was really important for us to go to school. I didn't have a plan. I knew, and I don't really think I even had a choice. I just had to go. Kind of like it was just kind of like, this is what you're going to do, because you're representing you're standing on the shoulders of others. So I went to school, and I basically was just trying to figure out, like, what can I do to make money? And graduated from college and went to go make money. Did like corporate work. Worked for a big corporate organization doing staff development. It was a lot of sales. I hated it, David. I hated it. It did not feed anything in me.
Right.
It didn't feed that. It fed the need to be able to have stuff, buy a house and be able to go on vacation, have a nice car, all those things you think are the American dream, all those things that you're supposed to have. But, you know, as I got older, I was like, man, there's got to be more than just having like money and stuff. So I was very privileged to have the opportunity to quit that job when I was not satisfied, and take some time to figure out what I want to do that would feed me. And I ended up working for a nonprofit. I took a few jobs, but the job that stuck, that had the most meaningness to me, was a nonprofit called Self Help.
Oh yeah.
You know, based in started in Greensboro, but it's, you know, it's a larger nonprofit now. But you know, at the time, you know, it was in a pretty good state of change. But I started to work there, and I was able to take some of the skills that I learned in the corporate space and apply it, you know, in an operational sense to this nonprofit that was, you know, starting to grow. So I was still kind of doing like staff development, HR, operational stuff. But the work that I was doing was contributing to like this bigger, larger thing that was bigger than me, that was like supporting economic opportunity for all, which I thought was really, really cool. So like, I think it's the most important decision that I ever made, was to get involved, to work at that organization. I learned a lot. And so working there really got me thinking about like other ways I could contribute to community. I got to spend time in rural areas like Reidsville, North Carolina, where I grew up. I had no idea that I would ever end up back in Rockingham County doing work. But the more that I worked at this organization, Self Help, I got opportunities to be in rural communities in North Carolina, like Laurinburg, or Hendersonville, Wilson, like these really cool places that had these thriving economies that were where there was a large industry or factory that was kind of like the center and economic base. And then when that went away, the community started to die a little bit. And so, but there was still a need for like these strong financial products. And so I got a chance to kind of see those towns, and it made me think a little bit more about, well, what's going on in my hometown that is kind of like Laurinburg, or these other places that I got a chance to visit. And not only did I get a chance to see these, David, in North Carolina, the work that they were doing was in California, in small rural communities.
Wow.
Some of the work was in even in an urban space, but in smaller states, the south side of Chicago.
Right.
So I was able to kind of like, you know, think a little bit about like, you know, how could I contribute to something that was bigger than me, was the first goal, which I did by working at this organization. But how could I get my feet on the ground and do something that was more intentional? And so I started to spend more time in Rockingham County. I started to have conversations with other people who are from Rockingham County who fit the same model. You know, Gen X, person of color, for a lot of reasons, didn't want to come back, political, just, you know, innovation, a myriad of reasons why folks decide not to come back to rural communities. But how could we figure out ways to contribute? So that the work at Self Help, the work that I wanted to kind of do, where I had more intentional work with people on the ground, and a call back to this place where I grew up, led me to thinking about creating a nonprofit type of vision in that space. And that's where NC100 came from. And so NC100 originally was just like this idea that we came up with. We called it something else back then. So this is 2012. We called it the Rockingham County Champions for Education. And basically what we wanted to do was raise money, do some professional networking, and figure out ways for us to pour back into Rockingham County, because we weren't gonna live there anymore. But we did want to, you know, pour back in. So we were raising money, and we were helping kids go to college. So, you know, there's 5 high schools at the time. We were helping, you know, like $1,000, $1,500 for a few years. That was fine, and I definitely don't want to denigrate or poo-poo, you know, folks that do that kind of work to help people get a few $1,000 for books and stuff like that. But we eventually started thinking about how could we have systemic impact, and how could we create conditions and environments where more people could thrive. And so that's what NC100 is. Basically, it's supporting people in Rockingham County and beyond, using the information and resources from people like yourself, other folks in other communities. Like, how can we pour resources, people are alumni, people in Raleigh, people in Charlotte, ideas into this area, and do some really cool work and support young people, other folks on either creating wealth or protecting wealth. And by doing those two things, you would have better and sustained health outcomes. The
Right.
health outcome work was something that we approached the KB Reynolds Charitable Trust about, and felt like our work in doing this economic development, community development, in a way that respected diverse stakeholders, was something that we thought was investable, and they thought so too, thank goodness,
Yeah.
along with other grants and stuff that we were able to kind of build out. And from that relationship, we met Calvin Allen at Rural Forward. So anybody in this general area who's familiar with Rural Forward, probably there's a lot of folks that know who Calvin Allen is, but he's the leader of the Rural Forward work that is really focused on health equity. It's focused on, centering diverse stakeholder voice, facilitation in large arenas, small arenas, and trying to help people think about solutions and strategies to improve health outcomes, and just overall community good. And so it was a marriage that was just kind of worked out. They concentrate in partnership with the trust in 10 communities, 10 counties, Rockingham being one. And we decided to, forge a partnership. NC 100, my services connected to the work they do at Rural Forward. And now, I do the work for NC 100 that is concentrated in Rockingham County and beyond, but I also get a chance to do work with Rural Forward across the state in those 10 counties in partnership with MDC, an organization based out of Durham.
Right. Yeah. I don't know when you sleep, but it's I'm just so impressed at the amount of work that you do, but also the impact and the type of work that you do on communities that have their own challenges that are with a lot of things you talked about, economic challenges, health disparity,
Yeah.
all of those things that certainly every community has some degree of that, right? But rural communities tend to have a higher number of folks who are impacted by those things. In your work, with the other nonprofits that you partner with and you engage with, one of the things we're talking about is one of the traits of being a nonprofit tough community, of being a nonprofit tough organization, is that they're effective, right?
Yeah.
That they effectively use the funds that they're given, that they effectively manage the resources, and that the work that they do is able to be tied directly to impact. So, from your experience, what does an effective organization look like? What does an organization that is truly making impact? What are some of the common kind of traits or characteristics that you've seen in those nonprofits?
Yeah, I think they all have in common some clarity on what they are trying to address. And that's big picture and little picture. So like there's this big vision that I think that they're casting that people can kind of grasp, and there's some clarity. I think that's something that an effective organization has.
So it's that vision, right?
That vision, hey,
Right.
here's where we're going, optimally. Here's what we're trying to solve for.
Right.
Sometimes solve with instead of solve for. And then clearly stated goals. I think that's something that makes an organization effective. Other thing that's really important, especially for smaller organizations, is like sustainability, like a plan of like, how can we keep the work sustained? And that's a financial challenge a lot of times for small organizations. For larger organizations that don't have the issue about keeping it sustained, it's being clear about what succession looks like. I think effective organizations find a way to stay away from that, the draw of being having that force of personality be the driver of the work. I have been part of large organizations, and had a chance to witness the work of a small organization like mine, and then get to do the work that I know I've shared with you that I've been able to work with. And sometimes there's this place where the founder of the organization is so tied into the work, and the funding comes through the founder, and the vision is a vision cast by the founder, and there's not enough buy-in or board engagement or community engagement or diverse stakeholder agreement for how the work is going to go, that when that voice goes away, then the organization sometimes loses a lot of momentum. So I think the big things, the clear vision, having clearly stated goals, engagement, taking the time to like have really great diverse stakeholder voice, and then staying away from the draw of like wanting to have like that really dominating, individual force of personality that drives the work, because I don't think it can be sustained. So yeah, succession planning is huge, and we have that conversation with folks all the time. Like, what happens, in a more crude way? It's like, what happens if you get hit by a potato truck tomorrow?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
What happens? Like, what happens to the work? Or you change your mind and somebody decides to, you win the lottery and you decide that you don't. All of a sudden, you don't want,
Right.
the nonprofit stuff goes out the window. No, I'm joking, but there has to be some type of sustainability succession plan for the work.
Right.
Or it's not going to survive. So I think those are effective ones. And clarity, inclusion as well too. Inclusion in decision making, clarity, transparency, and like how decisions are made, I think is important for effectiveness.
Yeah. Yep. No, I think those are all great. I mean, it's, to your point, that clarity, in the vision and also the mission, right? I've seen a lot of nonprofits stray from their mission,
right?
Chasing kind of that shiny object, or, hey, I think we want to do this too, right? It's that TOO that tends to get nonprofits off course a lot of times, and it makes them less effective, even though their heart is to do more, right?
Right.
I mean, they want to make a bigger impact, but the impact that they're making with the work that they're doing with clarity is much more powerful than trying to chase something kind of shiny or trendy or whatever that is, right? So staying the course a lot of times can, if the course is effective, right? We don't want somebody to stay a course if they're not making a difference, but certainly for those organizations that do, there are times where it makes sense to expand or to partner or to grow. But there's also times where it's really smart and wise to stay the course and to keep doing what you're doing.
I think, David, the one thing I'd add too is sometimes especially for organizations that are dealing with that sustainability on the funding, if you're coming from a place of scarcity, you can be persuaded to move in directions from a funder.
Yes.
Because you need the funding to keep doing the other thing that you really care about. So you're going to rob Peter, rob Peter to pay Paul. So, and that happens. I mean, I've seen it happen.
It does.
There have been times where, we've had conversations in my board about, wow, should we take this pot of money? It will help us operationally move this direction, but it seems like there's a potential that we could end up going this direction, which is not really where we're going to go. But we want to keep paying our such and such person.
Right. So. Yeah. And how do you, I mean, it's interesting you say that. I had a client of mine, a friend of mine who we were speaking the other day, and she said, "You're going to be so mad at me." I said, "Why is that?" She said, "Well, so-and-so called, an acquaintance of both of ours called and offered me this amount of money, right? And it wasn't a small amount of money." And my friend said, "I turned it down." And I said, "Okay, tell me why." And she went through the reasons why. And I said, "That makes sense to me, right? I mean, and it wasn't a no, it was a not now, right?
Not now.
Right? And that, to me, I think donors respect that, right? That when you say, you know what, this isn't the time for this right now, we're going to follow up with you. We're going to be in touch, and here's the opportunity. But right now, we're just going to have to decline. We're grateful, but and that takes some when you talk about being effective, I mean that takes some guts, first of all, right, to turn down 5-digit amounts of money.
Yeah.
But it also takes wisdom to be able to make those decisions that for the long term are going to make your organization more successful. So thank you for bringing that up. I think that's a great point, that that idea of, again, chasing the shiny thing or chasing that money can really draw people off course.
Right.
There's a lot of power to that, you know? Oh, you still there?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, tell me, so with your work, especially with the Rural Forward, I know you engage a lot of nonprofits in supporting their missions and helping them to be more effective, to be more sustainable. You know, either what are some of the challenges you've seen there, or what are some of the successes that you've seen with some nonprofits that, you know, have demonstrated those, you know, the traits that we've talked about of being effective, and you know, what is it that you and Rural Forward do to help them get to that point, right?
Yeah, I think that we maybe the main thing that I think is the main value that we bring sometimes that's been lifted up, especially lately with some targeted work, specifically a project that we we started this year. The Community Foundation, North Carolina Community Foundation, they put some money out into the nonprofit space as a connection in response to COVID. So it's really disaster. I mean, I guess all funding for nonprofits is disaster.
Yeah, right.
But COVID is a particular, you know, special type of disaster. But they put some money out there for sorry about that. For organizations that had been directly or disproportionately impacted by COVID. So
Yeah.
the through line was, you know, rural, leaders of color, communities that needed support that were primarily folks of color, communities where English was not the primary language or low
Yeah.
wealth. So they really wanted to make sure they were getting, and this is operational money, David. So this is, don't take this money and put it towards your food bank or, you know, buy more computers, or, you know, it's, you know, I mean, if you do, you can. But the goal of this money was to, what could you do to, you know, build some capacity for your organization to do that sustainability piece.
Which
And
is a huge.
and what we found, and also in partnership, I should not leave out the Blue Cross Blue Shield Foundation. So
Right.
those folks made it actually, you know, pay for my time and my partner Andy, and
Right.
we have been working with, you know, 18 or 19 organizations this in the last 6-7 months,
Wow.
specifically that got this funding, and talking to them about how can we support them capacity building and having them define what that looks like. And the thing that they've given us feedback that has the most value is just the coaching.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just bouncing an idea off of them and giving like a little bit of validation to something that they already thought was true, you know, or like they thought they were, does this sound right? Does this sound right? What are other organizations doing? Like, so because we have these relationships and we've been doing this work and we have this ability to kind of facilitate conversations, we can help them, especially like the leaders of the organization. We can facilitate a conversation with their board or facilitate a conversation with community stakeholders that allows them to be participants and not have to worry about process. Like we take over the process and let them worry about content. And so it's allowed them to be able to move certain ideas forward. We've been able to build some trust and have conversations about, is this really the best use of your time doing this, this, and this? Should people be communicating with you directly on your personal phone or your personal email if they have a issue, you know, or they need access? Are there other organizations or other people that are doing something similar that we could pull together to have a conversation? Website, I mean, you know, like just I think that, so the things that have been and I'm trying to think of something else that's I'm lifting up. Oh, and some back office stuff, David. I mean, like there are just some things where hey, what's compliance look like? Or did you think about this opportunity, you know, searching for this opportunity for this grant? Or did you think about this? So I think the successes, I would say, is, you know, we've been able to build some trust, free up people, ask really great questions about why do you say you want a strategic plan, but why do you want a strategic plan and what do you want to get out of it?
Right. Or is it just because everybody else has a strategic plan?
Correct, correct.
I mean, I know a strategic plan is important, but right. I mean, why is now the time that you're thinking about this, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Merrill, that you mentioned that. You think about nonprofit leadership, and it can be a little lonely in that position, right? I mean, because you're asked to do, especially at a smaller organization where capacity is at a premium.
Yeah.
You're asked to do so much and to play so many roles, and some leaders want that and they thrive on that, but most leaders need a little bit of space, right? You
Yep.
need a little bit of capacity to be able to step back and say, okay, why are we doing this? Or what else is something that we could do that's going to make us better? But because they get so into the weeds of their day-to-day operations, they don't have the capacity or the ability or the freedom to do that. So I love that you're coming in and you're helping to guide them in a way that's giving them that space, right? To step back a little bit and kind of re-examine some of those things. I think that's so important, but they're busy doing the work, right? So how do you do that? And your organization, it sounds like, has really found a sweet spot there of saying, let us be a little bit of counsel. Let us be an ear to hear because sometimes somebody just needs to hear something, hear themselves say something, right? For them to know, well, that's not a great idea, or that is a good idea. I get where that can go now. So but oftentimes my experience is nonprofit leaders, even the board members kind of have their own agenda, right? And I love board members, but they're in their own place too. So nonprofit leaders don't always have kind of that sounding board that is so valuable to those of us. A lot of times in a business role, right, you kind of have a team, right? And it's harder in those teams, you have space to do those things. So I think that's a great part of being effective, of being given that permission, even sometimes to step back and to ponder, right? What's going on.
And you said a key word too, David, business. We have really had some targeted conversations about your nonprofit, and sometimes this can be controversial, and sometimes, but your nonprofit is not necessarily a charity. It is a business.
Yeah.
And you're not making money for shareholders, but it is a business. And so you want to be thinking about that, like the infrastructure, you want to be thinking about, budget forecasting. You really want to treat it like a business. And I think sometimes we've had conversations, like real frank conversations about, hey, this is not going to cut it.
Yeah.
Now, this is not going to make it sustainable. Like, you've got to be thinking about, like, what are the processes that you need to put in place, potentially for auditing, to be able to know, if you're going to be able to afford to be able to do X, Y, and Z. Sometimes people will make decisions about, oh, we can't afford that. I'm like, well, you don't know if you can afford it because you haven't really kind of forecasted and really thought about, what you're going to do with those funds. So in my opinion, put my personal opinion hat on, as some of our facilitators would say, I think nonprofits, especially the grassroots ones, they either need someone who is in some type of CFO role or a very strong number two who is focused on operations.
Yeah. And it's, I get, Angel Oak, we do marketing, right? I mean, that's our thing, marketing for nonprofits. And, so often, even, we started doing this 10 years ago. Next year's our 10th anniversary. So over those 10 years, we've especially in the beginning, we ran into so many nonprofits that say, our board doesn't want us to spend money on marketing, right? Or our board doesn't want us to spend money on hiring an accountant, and I'm thinking, what business in its right mind would not do some degree of marketing, would not hire somebody to manage their books, right? Well, get a volunteer to do that. Well, you get what you pay for in most cases, right? So, but the great news that I've seen over the last years is that more and more boards and more nonprofits are willing to understand that when they invest in some of those kind of those back office things you're talking about, or invest in some marketing, or maybe fundraising consulting, or whatever those services are, their growth is tied to their investment in many of those services, right? So there may be an initial underlying expense, but the return on that investment pays off exponentially over time. So
Right.
it's hard to get past that idea of getting beyond that 15% operation budget, right?
Right.
And I admire anybody who really can maintain that and continue to do well over time and be sustainable. But my experience is that there are times when there's investments that need to be made in particular services that are kind of business oriented, right? And having people like you continue to advocate for that, I think, is really important within the nonprofit community.
And I totally get it. I mean, like I said before, when you're dealing from a place of scarcity, I totally get it. So I think my job and what we're supposed to do is we offer that. We can, help them think through a process of like, hey, here's what you can gain from thinking about it this way. And here's what some of the pitfalls may be if you decide to think about it in the traditional way or the way you have been thinking about it, and then let them decide. But still, because it's very difficult, right? In that space where we're building trust and we're providing that service where as a facilitator, again, we have to just be the process person. It's like, here's what our, the process, this is what you said you want. And if you want this, this, and this might be a strong recommendation of how to get there.
Right.
And then let them make that decision and hope that it works out. But it's very hard to sometimes build that or without the trust, because that's where the trust comes in. So if we don't have the trust, then we probably won't get to where we want to get to with them making that decision. But hopefully we're able to build it. We'll see.
Well, Merald, thank you for your time today. Is there any one piece of advice you would really want folks to walk away with today? I mean, we're talking to mostly nonprofit leaders through this series. What is it that you would like them to walk away with? That one piece of advice you might give them.
I think there's two things. So there's two different audiences there. So like because I've been in two spaces. I think for the larger nonprofits that don't have some of the sustainability issues, one thing that I definitely have been thinking about and would wish and hope that organizations are thinking about is inclusion in real ways. And that's decision making, not inclusion in symbolic ways. I think there are well-intentioned folks that are doing really great work, and they have people in place that check boxes that create sometimes weird, potentially toxic situations for staff. And I think with nonprofits and what I've seen, I've had just several conversations with folks in larger nonprofits, and I'm hoping that over time, we've learned a little bit about how important it is for people to be able to show up and be their full selves. And so I'd love for our larger nonprofits to be thinking about that with their staff and how they respect how people show up in the world.
No, that's great.
So that's number one. For the smaller nonprofits, I definitely would urge them, and I'm still working on this, about really being thoughtful about positions versus interests when you're doing community outreach. People are really this is something I'm still working on, David. So that's why I'm highlighting this.
We're all a work in progress.
God's still working on me. People will tell you their hot take about how they feel about all types of stuff. And when you do community work, and
whether you ask or not, right?
Whether you ask or not. And if you feel like when you're doing community work or you're trying to figure out ways to work in different communities, and somebody shares something with you, and on the surface, you don't know if they're necessarily aligned to your personal values, sometimes like you just kind of close them off and you say, you know what, I don't want to deal with that person. Everyone in the community has value. Every single person has value. So starting with that framing, at least I would recommend, or at least that's my opinion, everyone has value. Everyone has a position and they're gladly willing to share that. I think what I'm trying to work on in doing community work and trying to learn different perspectives is trying to figure out the difference between the position that you have and then where that comes from. What's the interest? So the way I think about it is your position is like a leaf. And one of the folks that, Rural Forward draws this really well and says it much better and like more eloquently than I can. But like the positions are like the leaves on the tree, and you can see those. They're very visible and they fall off. You kind of see them. But underneath the tree in the ground are the roots, and that's where those leaves come from originally. From this origin. You got to dig a little bit deeper sometimes if you really want to, if you live by that value that everybody in the community has value. So if you do believe that, try to dig a little bit deeper, maybe ask a question if somebody doesn't agree with you on something that you feel it's a really hot button topic of, why do you feel that way? Or what's important to you, and try to bridge some of those gaps. Now, I know it's difficult, and sometimes somebody's going to say something that's just going to make you just want to, run away or just, close them off or just never want to talk to that person again. But I am really trying to be a little bit better about that because I really do believe all people in our community have value, truly.
Yeah, and that's why I've loved doing these conversations, these Talking Tough series, because I've gotten a lot of different viewpoints, and it's been really interesting. What I'm trying to lean into is if I can get to the point where discomfort is comfortable, right? So that if I feel discomfort, I know I'm probably getting into an area that I need to explore further, right? And not walk away, and to have conversations. What I love is to be able to have conversations knowing that we're probably in a little different place, whether it's politically or socially or emotionally or whatever that is, right? But we're coming from a little different place, but we still approach it in a civil way, in a way that shows respect, and to your point, that acknowledges their value, right?
Right.
And that to me is, I just love seeing that in the community more, because we have so little of it, it seems like. And I know it's out there and it's just not as visible,
Right.
because you're not capturing that on TikTok, right?
No, that's not what we share. We only share the highlights.
The highlights. Well, Merald, thank you so much for your time. And if people wanted to get in touch with you and learn more about NC 100 and Rural Forward, how can they learn more?
I think the best thing for NC 100 is just to go to www.nc-100.org.
Okay.
And for Rural Forward, if they just go to www.mdcinc.org, they'll find us.
All right. And that's M as in Mary, right? MDC.
Yeah. M as in Mary. M as in Mary.
Okay, great.
Well,
thank you for your time today. Look forward to following you and staying in touch. I just really enjoyed learning so much more about you and your team and the work you're doing in rural North Carolina. So thank you for all the work you're doing, and keep up the great work, and let us know how we can continue to help you.
Certainly. Thank you so much, David.
All right. Take care now.